So what I'd like to do is to let them take some time. With only 3 panelists, I think we're going to have a lot of time for some questions and some thoughts and some discussion before lunch. So I'd like to go ahead and let John Wood with U.S. Wellness Meats take the first few minutes with you, and then we'll move on to Dr. Wiegand and then David Holloway. Thank you.
Mark, thank you. Can you hear me?
Just go ahead and keep talking.
They'll
pick it up.
All right, very good. First of all, I'm honored to be here today, and I'm honored by by Governor Nixon and Director Fordyce for having the foresight to bring this group together. We have a lot of talent in this room, and I recognize a lot of faces. A little bit about my background. My name again is John Wood. I founded U.S. Wellness Meats back in 2000, and I would say I was probably the laughingstock of Lewis County when I left. I actually left the cattle feeding industry. I was involved in that for 25 years, and I thought in order to market, you have to get as close to the consumer as humanly possible to actually harvest the best margin. And the internet was probably about 1995 is where we could really the first access to the internet and direct sales. And that was about the time I discovered an interest in grass-fed beef, and there was a couple of carrots there that I thought would be an interesting niche, and we were so far ahead of the curve it wasn't even funny. But if you roll the clock up 15 years, we're now probably the #1 marketer in the nation, going direct. FedEx is moving about 30 to 35,000 pounds a week in little square boxes, which is kind of a nightmare to manage and lots of moving pieces. But the interesting thing is that consumers are willing to pay for meat delivered to their door. They'll pay for quality, they'll pay for service, and anybody in this room, you have that market capability. So we were able to build that market slowly over time. It's taken a long time. The first 5 years, I said we were out in the North Atlantic. In fact, Dr. Parcell came up and spoke to us probably in about year 2 or 3. We were kind of grasping for straws, and it's just a simple matter of building customer base. And we took a crash course in meat fabrication, in trying to produce this product that we could sell. And as we gained some traction, we actually, and I'm going to wear 2 hats here today. I'm going to discuss a project that Masvida is working with. And I met an individual in 2003 after a Masvida grant. His name is Harry Kemker, and we actually did some business development work with him. He's a fascinating character, Navy SEAL for 20 years, MIT, won in class back in the 70s, one of the more interesting people I've ever met. In fact, he was going to be here today. He was going to be your keynote speaker. He was unfortunately wounded in Afghanistan back in the 1980s, lucky to survive, and he's actually undergoing some repair work surgically this week. It flared up last week, and he wishes to express his regrets for not being able to be here, but he's one of the key reasons why we were successful. You got to plan. If not, you're going to plan to fail. So while I've kind of teased you with this Masvida study, I will discuss it briefly. I was encouraged by Senator Munslinger several years ago while he was watching our progress. I'd like to also say that Senator Munslinger bought the very first box of beef we ever sold back in 2000. He did believe that we might be able to pull this off. One of the few people that did so and put his money where his mouth is. So I actually did an advertisement for him in his campaign that he was supportive of small business. But he suggested that we look at the possibility, and I respect Mike Dering's comments there in the back earlier today, of we are giving up a lot of value in the state, and I also respect Dr. Plain's comments. You might spend $1.1 billion to capture an additional billion of value. We've got to be mindful of that. But we have actually instituted a study. We wrote it, and we wrote the grant back in 2012. Dr. Dan Gale, the veterinarian in Lewis County, Zach Irwin, who I think is in the room, he's the livestock specialist up in Adair County, Dr. Trent Callahan, a veterinarian in Southwest Missouri, and we wrote this grant looking at the feasibility of a large packer in the state of Missouri, how we might be able to increase that value chain. And essentially, in the course of this study, we've discovered there's about $1.7 billion that's escaping, and we talked about those numbers earlier today. And we are just letting our sister states take advantage of us around the fringes in Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, Oklahoma. And we were trying to look at this thing from a financial, from a marketing standpoint, and a technical basis. We wanted to see where we would locate one, if it's feasible. And believe it or not, the feasibility study is not quite 100% done. The marketing piece is nearly written, but not quite complete. It'll be complete here in the next 30 days. And I think there's going to be an opportunity to actually have the author of the study meet with several of the critical decision makers in the state sometime in the month of February. But as we already discussed this morning, 9% of the cattle being born in the state are fed in the state roughly. And every time you can do the value-added game, you're going to pick up, for every employment person, you're going to pick up 4 to 5 times that number when you scatter down the value chain. It's, if this thing is successful, and it needs to be successful in order for us to continue here. But there's actually 3,055 counties in the United States that actually produce beef. Cornell University actually has a complete database for the 2012 census, and Cornell actually has a motherlode of all the data for this report that we pulled. We factored in everything from reproductive rates. We factored in how many people it takes to pull the ribeye off the kill for line. And it's in order to be economically competitive, this plant's going to have to harvest. We've actually got a design to do at a maximum capacity of 1,650 cattle per day, which is probably 3 times the size I had in my head when we started this thing. We've done a statistical model. No emotions in this whatsoever. We've looked at every county in the state of Missouri to where the consumers live. We've looked at where the cattle supply is. And when you blend this spoopery of all this data, it actually falls back into Cape Girardeau County. It's kind of the ideal place to actually build a facility. And we have access, pretty much our market from the state of Missouri is southeast of us. We have an unfair transportation advantage, and there's about 70 million people that fall into that 982 counties south and east, and that's where our unfair advantage is from the standpoint of price. I'm aware of the South Dakota plant story. The engineer that actually helped us, the qualified vendor who put the numbers together for the plant, there were a number of things that went wrong in South Dakota before the plant was ever built. So there's quite a story behind that from people in the industry. In the Mississippi plant, I was kind of aware of that story, and there was a touch of fraud, I think, involved in that one as well. There was some money that disappeared. So I think there's a couple of reasons why some of these issues might have failed, and if we play smart, we might be successful in the state. And the pro forma, Mr. Kempker is probably as good at economic modeling, and I think Dr. Brown and Dr. Ron Plain would be impressed with the amount of foresight that's gone into this. We're figuring net present value, internal rate of return, payback in years, true profit and loss state, balance sheets, funds flow. There's a suite of macros that run sensitivity analysis for a number of critical components, level of capital expenditures, weighted average cost of capital, merchant revenue unit value, captive revenue unit value, offal revenue unit value. And believe it or not, one of the critical components to success or failure is how you manage the offal coming out of this plant. This is going to be very lucrative if you market it properly. And you don't think about offal as a critical thing, but even in our business with U.S. Wellness Meats, we sell everything. Marrow bones, we make stock out of that, we make broth out of it. We actually buy heart from my competitors, and these things you don't think have a lot of value, that's where the best margins are. So being able to move the things that most people throw away is critical to success. And we've, basically, Mr. Kempker has told me, like in the chemical world, he's actually helps design and build large chemical plants, and you have to plan the marketing 3 or 4 years out in advance. Before you ever break ground, you have to know where some of this product is going to go. So there's a tremendous amount of thought that has to go into it. And he's created what he calls a Monte Carlo simulator where you can play all the what-if strategies. Pro forma switches are set up where you can only have 50% capacity in year 1, and then rank it up 5% a year. And we also suggested we need to have some captive supply built into this thing so you can regulate the flow better. I mean, there's a possibility you could create, a fairly sizable feedlot to actually For the gentleman back here in the back that raised a question a while ago, you don't have to all feed cattle in the state of Missouri. We could set up a feedlot that takes over the ownership, manages this responsibility. Cull cows will be integral to this thing. We've actually looked at the number of dairy cull cows, and so it'll be a many-faceted thing, and the governor would like to see branded beef. And I think where the real wealth comes from is over time you develop brands from reserve products. You can capture added value with the genetics we have. So those are all things in our favor. We've laid the foundation. We've also dialed in all sorts of costs, such as EPA permitting, USDA costs, and even it's just incredible the amount of detail that's come out of this financial model. And our biggest competitors, one gentleman sitting right next to me, obviously JBS, Cargill, Tyson National Beef, and so we just have to find a niche in here where we can play and play smart. And like I said, the real wealth is going to be developed over time. Marketing is going to be conventional. We have corn and we have soybean meal, and we'll do the commodity product, Missouri branded beef bills over time. There's niches in the organic market, and there's specialty markets. Specialty markets are small niches, but they're out there, and they can be actually worked with as well. This plant actually is forecast to cost about $126 million, including the capitalized interest. Borrowing rate set at 6% on the pro forma, about $48 million of initial equity, and about $72.5 million of borrowing capacity, 8-year amortization. It looks the same. Actually, it appears to be quite profitable if we can keep it full. That's the trick to the whole issue. Working capital figured into 5%, and indicating the maximum throughput of 1,650 cattle per head per day. And obviously, it takes expertise to manage and run that. And there are several different ways to go with that operation. But like I said, this study is not 100% complete. It will be completed within the next 30 days, and the author would like to share some time with the state of Missouri when it is completed. He's got a whole suite of charts. It's quite fascinating how they selected location just by dumping in all the data around the United States. So it's far more, what's come out of this has been far more interesting than I thought going in. I kind of had in my head you'd have a 500 head per day facility, a little bit like several around the Midwest, but in order to compete at the plant gate, you've got to be on the same, you have to be at the same level of capital cost per head. That's what our number one players in the country are. So if we're gonna play, we've got to play smart and play on a larger scale. And we would actually drag in cattle from other states. Obviously, you would have, there's no USDA slaughter of any consequence in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas is limited. So there's potential there why the Eastern Missouri actually was selected. But those are my initial comments, and I thank you for your time.
I'm Brian Wiegand. I'm one of the meat scientists here at the University of Missouri. I'm also a cattle producer in Randolph County. My capacity at the university is kind of threefold. I'm the technical advisor to the Missouri Association of Meat Processors. We have about 115 plants that pay their dues annually. So I spend a lot of time with them looking at troubleshooting everything from food safety to some days of the week I feel like an economist, or at least I get to play one, with some of the business decisions that they make. If we take the state of Missouri, we are small and very small processors. We have a little over 200 businesses that would qualify as small or very small processors. And I think something that John just said is important to understand. We have had a lot of conversations about mid-size packing. I think we have figured out that mid-size packing doesn't exist for a reason. So we're either large or we're small and very small, and I think there are ways to make money in both of those. The packers, the small processors in this state, face the same issues that we as cattle producers do. Their hair is more gray than it is not. They have trouble figuring out what the succession plan is going to be for their business. Many of them bought a plant 25 years ago and then they added on to it. It's much like our farmhouses. We stepped back from it and we built off 3 sides of it. Now we can't figure out where else to go. And if you talk to some, there are sometimes jokes in this business that you had a good fire and your plant burned down, you collected your insurance and you either built a new one or you got out of business. So it's a tricky business to be in. And if we go and talk to our financial agencies, if the local plant comes up for sale in our town, there aren't a lot of banks that just run right up to you and say, hey, I want to loan you the money to buy the plant. And there are a lot of reasons for that. They are financially risky for some of the reasons I've already spoke about, but now we're talking about perishable product, food safety liability, and these are the kinds of things that I think that we're faced with in the state of Missouri right now with our current processing facilities, is how do we get prop those people up? How do we educate them? How do we make sure that they're at the forefront of food safety? It's not that we can't do this. Our processors in the state are very good. Fewer and fewer are slaughtering. Slaughter is a terrible business to work in from the standpoint that it's labor intensive. It's not a lot of fun. Some people just really don't like the fact that we kill animals for consumption. So we have some things that work against us. However, if you're going to eat a steer, you're not going to eat him live. So we're going to have to figure out how to work our way through some of those challenges. So if I step back, and some of the questions that we were asked as a panel is, where do you see the current challenges? What are the future challenges? I think one of the current ones, we have the ability to grow some of these small plants. And I'll be real honest with you, there are 5 or 6 processors in this state that from a technology standpoint, from information use, they're ahead of us at the University of Missouri. We have a federally inspected plant here on campus, and we face some or maybe more challenges than some of the processors out in the state do. We have some business people that do a really good job. They've stepped out. They aren't averse to risk. They're borrowing millions of dollars to expand their current facilities, and they're looking to grow. A lot of them are in the niche. We have people that are processing under federal inspection, so they're trading interstate commerce. We have some heritage labeling, some local food movement, which if we latch on to the local thing, that's incredible. There's a lot of money in it right now. So I think there are opportunities, but we have to help some of those people understand that it's okay to expand where they're at, or let them know that we'll help you with a succession plan. It may not be somebody in your family. More than likely, it's probably not going to be. So are we going to transition that business to a new owner? Is that a current employee? It could be. Or is it somebody new? And here's a big challenge. We're not just butchers in this business. We don't train butchers. I get a lot of calls in my office. Where can I go to learn to cut meat? Yeah, that's what I say. You don't go somewhere to learn to cut meat. We aren't butchers. I'm a meat scientist. I can tell you how to break a beef carcass. It's much more complicated than that. So we don't just, it's an artisan business. It's a little bit art. It's a whole bunch of science right now. And some of us have trouble transitioning that. So if we aren't going to give processors the capacity to deal with a HACCP plan, hazard analysis and critical control points, that scares an awful lot of people. It's federal mandate. Happens for everybody. The large plants right down to the little bitties, unless they're not under inspection. And then they work under the Uniform Food Code. And these are all things that make your head spin. And when I say regulatory, most of us run out the door screaming. Well, it's a necessary evil. We have to have regulatory, or we're not going to have a safe food supply. So if we step back from it, one of the things that we hear from processors is, and I'll ask them, why aren't you operating under inspection? Because we have 3 levels in this state. You have federal inspection, state inspection, and custom exempt. Your local plant, more than likely, is custom exempt. So if you don't own the animal and you come in there and process it, it goes out as not for sale and it goes into your freezer. We're probably losing a lot of value in this business because I'm just paying someone to kill, chill, and cut that beef to go back in my freezer. So I'll say, why aren't we under inspection? People are scared to death of regulatory. Now, it does not cost anything. You don't pay somebody to inspect your product, state or federal. I think there's a lot of confusion around about that. Now, there are costs involved with having inspection, like you have to have a restroom for your inspector. Well, I assume you have a restroom for yourself in your plant, so that's probably not that great a cost. But the truth is, to work under inspection is probably where we need to be heading, and I try to encourage plants to do that. State inspection must be equal to or greater than federal inspection. So there shouldn't be any issues. If you want to trade within the state of Missouri, work under state inspection. You want to trade across state lines? Federal. You want to go to Canada? Federal. We have people that are trading in Canada. This summer, we took a trip up there. We talked to some people. I came back home and told the meat processors who wants to trade in Canada. 4 of them sent me emails and said, "Hey, Brian, you're behind the curve. We already do." So we're doing this. But I think we have to allow some of those people the ability to expand. Things like cooler space. If I'm going to kill a beef from my farm, I want it to hang somewhere between 10 and 17 days in the cooler. You know how many processors would say that'd be great, but I don't have the cooler space for you to hang beef for 17 days. So simply by having the ability to expand coolers, that's our problem at the University of Missouri. I don't have enough cooler space to dry age beef, to add value to it. So I think we have a lot of challenges. And from the small processor standpoint, I think there are things that we can do to have a friendly regulatory environment, to hopefully help the financial side of the world understand that, yes, there's a lot of risk involved in a food business, but there's a lot of upside to it as well. I'm going to quit talking for a minute.
Okay. David Holloway. I'm from JBS. Thankful to be here today and be involved in the discussion. But first, let me say happy 2015 to everybody here in the room, and I hope you have a good year. Again, we're pleased to be involved in the discussions that we've had already with some of the staff, and to be here today, and look forward to continuing those as the business evolves rapidly for all of us. I'll try to touch briefly on the questions that were posed. Basically, quick introduction about our operation. What are the challenges that we see from a processor perspective, and then what kind of solutions can Missouri provide for those things. Just a quick note on JBS. In the beef side of the business, we have capacity to process 26,000 head a day in the U.S. That's 22% of the U.S. total, and would encompass 9 plants from Arizona to Pennsylvania and a lot of places in between. Also, you may be aware, JBS has operations in Canada and large operations in Brazil and also in Australia. So JBS is a global beef company, also involved in the pork business and in the chicken business. From a standpoint of challenges, to us in both the short and the medium term, the key thing is overcapacity. We've got capacity to process a much larger herd than what exists today. The problems that have plagued most of you who are ranchers, I suspect, in this room, for the last generation, really, it's been cheaper to buy a calf than it was to produce a calf. So it's been hard to make money. And because of that, we've seen the numbers of cows decline. And as the numbers decline, that's fewer cattle that come to the feed yards. They've got an overcapacity problem. Fewer cattle come to the packing plants. That's an overcapacity problem. We estimate that number today at about 20 or 25%. So one out of every 4 or 5 shackles, or 1 out of every 4 or 5 plants, if they were all the same size, really we don't need today because we don't have animals to go on that. Each of those shackles that go through the plant, whether it's a small plant or a big plant, costs us not just the packer, but it costs the industry money because we're all in this together. So the function of the market has been for some time, and in our view continues to be, to bring that supply of shackles and supply of cattle back into line. We've done that over the last few years by closing some plants. And we've already talked today about how long it takes to bring supply back online due to the biology and some of the other challenges. So our view is in the medium term, the function of the market continues to be to bring that balance back in line by closing plants. In effect, packer margins have been bad. I mean, it's a great thing that producers are making money, and I'm happy to see that. The industry, I think, is happy to see that, because without you producing calves that ultimately come to our plants, then we're out of business as well. So we want to see you profitable. We're glad of that. One of my roles as a market analyst there at JBS is to follow the supply very closely. One of the things we look at is heifer retention. The way we look at it, it's at 20-year highs and accelerating. That's the best news that's a great Christmas present for the packer, in other words. And so we're really excited about that. But that supply is not coming on fast enough to get us out of the woods for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's a real challenge from the Packers' perspective. We've had, a couple of tough years. Again, back to the supply issues that were talked about. I won't plow that ground again, but it really comes down to the core of the problem that the industry has faced for a long time, and recognizing what that is and trying to figure out ways to change that, I think, are part of the solutions to all the problems we face and the reason we're here today. And a big part of that, JP, where are you at? I told you we'd talk about the pie. We view this as, for far too long, the size of the pie has been basically stable. So you've got the ranchers, you got the backgrounders, you got the cattle feeders, you got the packers, and we're all trying to get a bigger piece of the same size pie. Our view is the way forward and the future of our business for all of us to be successful together and to compete, quite frankly, with the other proteins. That's becoming a greater issue as beef prices go higher. We're going to have to figure these things out, and to grow that piece of the pie is for each of us to get a bigger piece of the pie, but for each of us to figure out ways to work together to grow that pie really is what we think the future of the beef business looks like. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're interested in working with producers in Missouri and elsewhere to try to find ways to do that. And in other words, we've just cannibalized each other's margins. Sometimes it's a cattle feeder who makes money. Sometimes it's a packer. In this case, it's the rancher. But that's a real challenge, not only short term and medium term, but a longer term challenge. And particularly, again, as we see in our own business, since we are involved in all three of the major meat protein species, beef, pork, and chicken, with record high beef prices today, we see our customers finding more ways to sell pork and chicken. One, beef's not available because we eat every pound that we produce, or pounds that we don't produce don't get eaten, so people are going to eat something. And that's a real challenge that we see from the standpoint of just price competitiveness. Because of that, it's been an incredibly difficult industry to win in over time. And it's getting more difficult because of those things. Trade barriers, it's another issue that we see as a challenge to the industry. They're, like everything else, there are solutions to those. It's just a matter of finding them, both tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. Y'all are very aware of what those are. No point in going into a lot of detail there. And then just to briefly wind up in the next step, from our standpoint, what are the solutions that Missouri can provide, Missouri producers can provide in this process, and looking at ultimately, even going down the path of building a packing plant here. One is, for it to be interesting for JBS, and I suspect our competitors as well, would be committed supply. How how much supply is available to be committed, a lot of those kind of things, how much investment's available, how much risk, is the state willing to take, how much risk are the producers willing to take. Now's a great time to do that. I mean, you're in better financial situation from a production standpoint. You've been in a long time. That puts you in a better position to take some risk to help start shaping what the next 5 or 10 or 20 years of the business are going to look like. So I guess those are the key things that I had. So I'll turn it back over.
Can we give all these panelists a hand, please? I was going to ask some of the economists a question earlier, so I'm going to ask a question of David real quick, and if he'd like to comment on it. With the recent change in the value of the dollar in relationship to the euro and to the yen, are you guys already seeing that may impact some of your export sales?
It's a good question, and it's one of the things, again, that we watch very closely. The dollar is right now trading at the highest level we've seen since 2005 against major currencies. I will say this, given both absolute high price levels and where the dollar has been recently, I'm a little surprised it hasn't impacted export trade as much as it has. We're watching for that. We're very concerned about that. We're starting to see some initial signs of that. It's just taken a little longer than we thought it might.
All right.
If I could add one more comment on that. And I think one of the things that was brought up this morning that's interesting from an export standpoint as well, and again, I won't plow that same ground, but just to add, I was doing some work recently, and if you look at it's the same old idea. Population growth and income growth are key drivers in meat consumption. If you look at middle income countries around the world, that's where the income growth has been, that's where the population growth is coming. And if you think about this, in the next 10 years, we're going to add, on a global basis, according to UN, World Bank, they're all fairly consistent in their forecast, 750 million people to the globe. That's more than doubling the population of the U.S. in the next 10 years. We think that's a very important part of the outlook for our industry as a whole. Sorry to take so long.
No, very good. All right. Questions? And go ahead and mention your name and maybe where you're from, and then we'll know more.
Jim McCann, past president, Missouri Cattlemen. John, with all of this information that you're compiling, putting together the viability of a process facility, do you have a number on what it's going to take in sheer numbers of cattle on feed in order to support a facility?
Mr. McCann, basically, we're looking, you can do the math, 5 days a week at 1,650. That's a lot of numbers, and that requires some pretty good diligence. This comment just made here about another 750 million people to feed. That's kind of a scary number, but we've looked at it from the cull cow standpoint. We know how many cull cows come out of Missouri. We know how many cull dairy, and we know how many cattle are getting away, and the model does support itself based on we've taken all 3,050 counties of the state, of the entire country, and looked at this model from the standpoint of numbers and availability, and those numbers are there. It just we have to play smart in order to. I was a little bit shocked at the size of the facility, and the gentleman doing the work has no emotional ties to it whatsoever. It's just strictly and you're looking at the hard numbers.
What we're actually looking at is a considerable amount of investment in feeding facility, not just on sheer numbers of cattle. Yeah, the cattle are here, but they're going somewhere else to go and feed. It's going to take a lot of money just to produce the feeding facilities to supply a plant, right?
I totally understand, and there's. I totally agree. And one of the caveats, one of his suggestions would be that you need to have a large feeding facility, hopefully fairly close proximity. That would be part of the captive piece. And I think Brent Bryant's going to talk about the hoop industry. I think what's changed in Missouri in the last 30 years is the ability to, but it's going to take some courage, and it's going to take some investment to make this thing work. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that, we talked about the pie. Well, there's this pie of the cattle industry, in order to produce this beef. But common sense tells me as the Ogallala aquifer dries up in the west, this industry is going to be moving east and north. I mean, Iowa's already seen the effect of that. I mean, the Iowa cattle feeding's gone up, but I think Missouri's kind of a sweet spot. We just need to have enough courage to think it's possible. And one thing while I got the floor here, I want to tie back to Dr. Wiggin. The other project that we actually have broken ground on in Lewis County in the last 30 days, we were building a rather large, sizable cold storage facility, 5,000 square feet of production space, and a state-of-the-art pick and pack facility. So these smaller producers we talked about, and I think that's integral to the state, we're going to be able, and those of you in the room, I'd be glad to speak to you today, but we're going to have the capability to actually help you market some of these specialty meat products that you're making. We work closely with Westerns at Green Top and Frickensmith down in southwest Missouri. Both those guys are going gangbusters. Those are two great success stories, and we're going to be able to offer you nationwide flat rate shipping on FedEx. We have an incredible rate. We can ship to Alaska, Hawaii for no extra cost, and I'd like to bring ourselves into this network where we can actually value add some of those products through the marketing engines and pick and pack. So we all have to work together. We all have a role in this thing.
All right, further questions? Back here.
Mike Deering, Missouri Cattlemen's. Dr. Wiggin, great comments there. Many of those small processors are also members of ours that you were talking about, and we would love to see those folks stay in business and capitalize on those niche markets. The thing that you did say that kind of concerned us is the fact that the aging processor, and I was curious, with your facility at the University of Missouri, do you have the technology, do you have the advancements with that facility to really prepare the next meat scientist? Do you have the best state-of-the-art technology that you have? And if that's no, because I believe that plant was built before my mother was born, if you don't have it, how do we make that happen so that we can get young people involved and make sure we have the best people out there doing this?
At least he didn't force me into the shameless plug on my own.
Thanks, Mike.
So if you've been on the campus of the University of Missouri, our slaughter facility was built in 1952. My PhD advisor was F.C. Parrish, Jr., who was a 37-year faculty member at Iowa State. When I came back to Mizzou in 2007, he came to visit. He went into the slaughter floor, and he says, "I'm glad to see you haven't done anything with it since I was here." It's a challenge. Our facility is a challenge. I appreciate the comment. Somebody said they think that we've revived the meat science program at the University of Missouri. For some of you that remember in the 60s, it was the University of Missouri and the University of Wisconsin were the King Kongs of meat science. And by some strange luck of the cohort that retired, they were hardly ever replaced. And the facilities were lightly updated. But we're in a situation, and it speaks, I made the comment about some of my processors are ahead of me in technology. I walk into some of my plants, I'm very glad that they are where they are. I mean, they are doing things that are quite incredible. But my ability to support them from the science side has waned greatly. So we have done some work, and Tom Lerner was one of our champions early on in this, and I've ended up in Jeff City a lot of days saying this is what we could do. These are the kinds of things that we could build. And we finally got off center a little bit and had some money to do some planning, and we are on the University of Missouri's master plan as a project, and we do have the potential to upgrade our facility. In fact, build a footprint that is back in one building. Right now we're in two different facilities. So To give you an example, I am Federal Establishment number 5077, and I am also Federal Establishment number 5077A, and I do business with myself because I am physically in two spots. The slaughter floor is next to the vet school, and the processing facility is attached to Eccles Hall, the William Stringer extension there. So if I do a food safety audit, I have 2 food safety audits annually. I can't do them at the same time. So I have federal food safety auditors come in, and a food safety audit, if you've ever been through one, can take as short as a week and as long as 2 months. So I get to devote that twice. So, it's a challenge. So we do have the ability, we have the plan in place. If you want to know what it takes about $10 million. So if anybody wants to write the check before you leave today, we'd be greatly appreciative.
Great, thanks, Dr. Wiegand. Further questions? Yes, over here, and then back here after Dr. Sexton.
I'd have one question for both John and Brian. I'm curious the difference, and John, you talk about how much value you add to the offal and those type of things. And Brian, how would that relate to the value that's given up by smaller processors as it relates to the differences in hides and drop and those type of things? In terms of what kind of money are we giving up just because of that inability, I guess, to market some of those products?
Today, I think we have a drop credit. Drop credit is all those things that we can have value for. And if you think about it, processors don't get paid to slaughter cattle. So if you really step back from a pure standpoint, the value of what's left is theirs. USDA actually gives you a value of drop credit weekly. And it can be anywhere from $32 a head to, when the hide market is really good, we can be the $50, $60 a head just purely from what goes in the barrel. And then we sort that back out to some serious value-added product. It goes out into the pharmaceutical industry, into the cosmetic industry, and then obviously, if you're a huge proponent of Italian leather shoes, we send a lot of hides there, and then they can come back as a pretty strong value-added product. So it's going to vary with the market conditions. The small processors and the very small processors can barely capture any value. In fact, it's a cost to them to have that go out the door and an offal barrel is rendering, and they're going to pay for that pickup. So the economies of scale for a very large processor are great because they have rendering rooms, they have offal rooms, they'll sort that product, they'll box the edibles, they'll get the hides treated and ready to go to a tannery. So there's a really big difference between having to pay for that stuff to go away on a rendering truck versus actually selling that product.
The thing that I found most interesting when I got into direct marketing was the first thing that always sells out is the liver, the kidneys, marrow bone stocks, and we've taken a lot of things and added value, like we make a liverwurst and we combine heart, kidney, and liver with ground beef, and so there's a tremendous amount of market potential there for what I call the weird stuff. I mean, it was just kind of amazing, like we actually buy Missouri lambs and processed lambs. The first thing that ever sells out is going to be the kidney, heart, and the liver, and I just couldn't believe that. But I mean, there's a market out there for those organ meats. It's hard to find, and we're actually rendering lamb tallow now and making lamb tallow available, and we sell like we'll take beef soot and take lamb soot, put it through a half-inch or three-quarter-inch screen, and there's always people wanting to buy straight soot. I mean, I just love selling fat. We have a standing order for 8 5-gallon buckets of tallow going into a restaurant out on the West Coast. We ship it every Wednesday, and it's just pure fat, and far more than the 4 cents a pound. It's kind of what the commodity rate is. So I encourage people to look at the entire animal because there's a lot of value in that animal, not where you think it is. I mean, it's anybody can sell middle meats, but have had the most fun figuring out recipes, and we found a chef in Atlanta, Georgia, that it makes a chicken stock and chicken gelatin and beef gelatin, and for 15 years I'd ask people, can you make a gelatin? And no one knew. And then this guy said, sure, just send me some bones, and so there's some interesting markets out there for pieces of the animal that most people throw away.
All right, we have another question right back here, I believe.
Harold Treese with the Missouri Department of Agriculture Meat and Poultry Inspection. And as Dr. Wiggin mentioned a while ago, a lot of these small operators are afraid of regulatory. But as you as producers can encourage your local plants to process under inspection for you so that you have much more marketing capabilities with products that can go to local stores, to a lot of farmers markets and things like that. And these people, as Dr. Wiggin and I both tell them, they don't need to be afraid of the regulatory business, at least as far as the state's concerned. I can't anymore speak for the federal after I left them a while back. But if you would encourage your local plants to produce product for you under inspection, it gives you a lot more marketability. Thank you.
All right. Did I have a question? I know I had one back over here.
Yep.
Yes.
Pat Thomas from the Missouri Senate. The question is, how hard is it going to be if shelf space actually has an end result? And how would we go about having extra shelf space inside the grocery stores if we have processors?
So the question becomes the shelf space, how hard is it going to be to attain that in the retail site?
Multiple processors.
And who are you addressing that question to?
The panel.
She's
The
addressing
panel.
that to John Wood.
Go ahead, David. You're the shelf space guy.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in retail, but, I will say this, again, just from the standpoint that, I guess two thoughts come to mind. One is our customers, retail customers, clearly want beef in the store. It drives sales, there's no question. They've reduced the amount of space devoted to beef because we're not sending them as much. So that's, again, we only eat what we produce. So they like to see more beef in the stores, period. The second thing is, from the standpoint, I don't know specifically if you're addressing branded beef or something along those lines, private label. We see that as a growing piece of the business. The USDA data shows that about 16% of all beef sold on a weekly basis today is branded product, and that number is growing week by week. So I think there is a need. I guess one other thought that comes to mind off the top of my head is from the standpoint of revenue. Meat departments at retail are driven by, they look a lot at total revenue. Obviously, net profit's important to them as well, but they don't get the revenue dollars by selling chicken or pork that they do from selling a pound of beef. So again, that's another reason why I think the more beef they can have in the retail meat case and the more space they can devote to that, the more they like it.
Pat, one more comment. I spent early December a couple days out on the East Coast. We ship meat to we're selling primals to a distributor in Connecticut, and I rode around for a day visiting high-end grocery stores. And it's amazing. You get in population-dense areas like the East Coast, and you'll have a major grocery store every 2 miles. I mean, it just kind of shocked me. We didn't drive very far, and we saw a lot of meat counter. But one of the things that the meat manager and these really top-notch grocery stores, they're looking for a story to sell, whether it's a special lobster, whether it's a special pork, whether it's a special beef. And for example, we were doing grass-fed beef, and they were looking for something that was not the normal. And so this niche of the specialty meat business, and they can sell it for a little, they can sell it for more money, and in some cases a higher margin. So from the shelf standpoint, at least the meat buyers and the meat managers that I've talked to in the last couple of years, they are looking for something new. It's part of the new principle in the beef business, and they will work. The ones that are really ambitious will actually help promote that project. But we could sell a lot more primals. I mean, our bread and butter is this network of families around the United States. We go door to door, but we could actually open the valve if we had more product just for straight distribution into those meat channels. And I have not seen resistance from the standpoint of shelf space yet.
I think those are good points. I know there's more questions, but we're going to probably break for lunch. One of the things on new products, I know the Beef Checkoff program on the national level has done a lot with product innovation, a lot of new products. The flat iron is one of the most popular cuts today in the retail case. And we're working with some new product innovators also in the state of Missouri to bring some other new products, fresh products that I think will be highly popular if we can ever get them commercialized. It's my understanding that lunch is going to be right across the hall. If you guys have questions for these guys, I'd say jump in the lunch line with them and ask them those questions or catch them the rest of the day.